also an anniversary for reflecting on how their long and successful partnership had endured.
I think that the main lesson that we've learned is that tolerance is the one essential ingredient of any happy marriage. And you can take it from me that the Queen has the quality of tolerance and abundance.
Tolerance the Queen did sometimes need to cope with her husband's sense of humour.
Can you get Radio 3 on it?
But Prince Philip's wit and sharp tongue sometimes created headlines which the palace could have done without. At age 90 here, he looked not to have a care in the world. But the hours spent on the River Thames for the Queen's Diamond Jubilee would leave him in hospital with a bladder infection. And there followed rare moments when the Duke was not by the Queen's side. His official diary did not go on, and when he announced his retirement from royal duties, Prince Philip did what he does best. He made a joke. This one was about his own advancing years.
I'm sorry to hear
And so it was just a few months later that the Duke bid farewell. On a wet August day in the forecourt of Buckingham Palace, he saluted the Royal Marines, of which he was the Captain General, and at 96, he completed his final official engagement. Retirement was mostly spent away from the cameras and mostly at Sandringham, which was where he had a car crash, one he escaped from with no injuries, remarkably, even at 97. 2 others were injured though, and it forced the Duke to surrender his driving licence, and with it, a bit of the independence he greatly valued. There were no more official engagements, but neither retirement nor a recent hip operation were good enough reasons to miss a big royal wedding. He watched his grandson Prince Harry marry Meghan Markle in 2018. And he also met the couple's son Archie when he was born a year later. It led to this photograph, one which showed just how much the royal family had changed since he joined it in 19. It hadn't changed enough.
Concerns and conversations.
During the coronavirus lockdown, Prince Philip was moved to Windsor Castle, where this picture was taken for his 99th birthday, and another for the 73rd anniversary of his marriage to the Queen. They both isolated at Windsor with a small number of staff to limit the risk of infection. And it was during that year he stepped out in public momentarily to hand over his military role with the Rifles Regiment to the Duchess of Cornwall. 99 years old and still making jokes. This one was about fitness. As he had done with people for so many years. He then headed back inside to resume his retirement behind closed doors. But of all the stays he had endured in hospital in his later years, 2021 would see the longest of them all. Prince Philip was discharged 4 weeks after first arriving and had a sudden visit one Saturday afternoon from his eldest son. The Duke of Edinburgh was treated for both an infection and heart surgery in that time. If Queen Elizabeth's reign is to be judged a success, it will be in no small part because of the man she married. In his adopted country, Prince Philip became the joint author of the Second Elizabethan era. She is the longest-serving monarch in British history, but at her side throughout was the longest-serving consort.
Our royal editor Chris Shipp reporting on the life of Prince Philip. Well, Chris is on the line with us now. Chris, first off, let's start by reflecting on the news and that statement that we have just had from the royal household.
Well, Chrissy, I think we should reflect on this by talking about what a sad moment this is for the Queen, the loss of the man that she has spent so much of her life with. And as we all know, he recently had his longest ever stay in hospital. He left King Edward VII Hospital in the middle of last month after being treated there for both an infection and then being moved to another hospital for a heart operation. That for him was a very difficult period. He's not a man who liked being in hospital. He liked his independence. And year with the Queen is where they've had their anniversary, their 73rd wedding anniversary in November. And in many ways, he spent more time in Windsor with the Queen in this last year because of the pandemic than he has at any other point in their lives together. He also had his 99th birthday. That was last June, and most people know that he was due to turn 100 this June, but he passed away this morning in Windsor. We've had that statement from the palace now to say that he passed away peacefully, they said, and that is where the Queen remains at this time.
And Chris, as you say, the Duke desperate to get home from hospital, desperate to get back to Windsor and be by the Queen's side. But this, of course, means that the Queen will continue her reign as a widow. Just how much of a support has the Duke of Edinburgh been to her over the years?
Well, I think it's important to take people back to that period of Prince Philip's life, after the war, when his relationship with Princess Elizabeth, as she was then, really flourished. Here is a man, still in his naval uniform. He was still serving in the Royal Navy at that time. And the wedding that they had in July of 1947 really lifted the national mood. Let's remember what a state Britain was in, broken and battered after the country. And that was a real high point, the wedding in November of 1947, when many or most of the country was still reliant on rations. He is a man who persuaded the palace, who he saw then as being rather out of date. He wanted them to film the coronation, and he's been at her side throughout. So here is someone who didn't really have an official role as consort, and how do you define that role? But he was an advisor, a confidant, and a rock.
Prince Philip earned the affection of generations here in the United Kingdom, across the Commonwealth, and around the world. He was the longest-serving consort in history, one of the last surviving people in this country to have served in the Second World War. At Cape Matapam, where he was mentioned in dispatches for bravery, and in the invasion of Sicily, where he saved his ship by his quick thinking. Changes in the post-war era. Like the expert carriage driver that he was, he helped to steer the royal family and the monarchy so that it remains an institution indisputably vital to the balance and happiness of our national life. He was an environmentalist and a champion of the natural world long before it was fashionable. With his Duke of Edinburgh Awards, he shaped and inspired the lives of countless young people, and the literary tens of thousands of events. He fostered their hopes and encouraged their ambitions. We remember the Duke for all of this, and above all, for his steadfast support for Her Majesty the Queen. Not just as her consort, by her side every day of her reign, but as her husband, her strength and stay of more than 70 years. And it is to Her Majesty and her family that our nation's thoughts must turn today. Because they have lost not just a much-loved and highly respected public figure, but a devoted husband and a proud and loving father, grandfather, and in recent years, great-grandfather. Speaking on their golden wedding anniversary, Her Majesty said that our country owed her husband a greater debt than he would ever claim, or we shall ever know. I'm sure that estimate is correct. So we mourn today with Her Majesty the Queen. We offer our condolences to her and to all her family. And we give thanks as a nation and a kingdom for the extraordinary life and work of Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh.
Well, the Prime Minister there, Boris Johnson, offering his condolences at the news of the death of the Duke of Edinburgh. We were speaking to our royal editor, Chris Shipp. We can go back to him now. He's on the line. Chris, we just saw a statement there from the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson. He talked about how Prince Philip helped steer the royal family and the monarchy. Unfortunately, we've just lost connection with Chris on the line there, but we can speak to our reporter Martha. And Martha, you were listening there to the words from Boris Johnson there. Help steer the royal family and the monarchy, and the support also that he mentioned to Her Majesty the Queen over 73 years of marriage.
That's right. While the Queen was reigning the country, he was taking a role as the head of the family. And as the Prime Minister mentioned, he was a father of 4 children, a grandfather of 8 grandchildren, and more recently, a great-grandfather to 10 great-grandchildren. And he was really the person who was in the background, making sure that the family was okay. He was dealing with the crises as they came up. He was advising his children as they went through difficult times. He was helping to look after all those issues that, while the Queen was busy with state business, he was able to assure her that he was looking after those things that were going on in the background.
Yeah, no strength on her stay, as she said. Martha, for the moment, thank you. Well, let's go now to our political correspondent, Daniel Hewitt, who is in Downing Street. Daniel, a very heartfelt statement from the Prime Minister there just a few moments ago.
Yeah, a fairly short, sombre statement from the Prime Minister. We saw the flags, 2 Union flags lowered to half-mast just before 12:10 here in Downing Street. It took Downing Street staff all of 10 minutes to get this lectern that was just outside number 10 into the street. Boris Johnson came out and spoke for a few minutes. He really poured praise on the Duke of Edinburgh and his life. He said he was an expert carriage driver who'd steered the royal family and the monarchy. Talked of his steadfast support for the Queen. He said the nation had not only lost a much loved and respected public figure, but also a grandfather, a father, and more recently a great grandfather. We will be hearing more over the coming hours from Downing Street. We expect to hear more about what happens from this point. National mourning begins straight away and lasts until 8 o'clock on the day of the funeral. What exactly national mourning will mean will be laid out by Downing Street at some point. Statements will be issued, and we can expect to hear at some point, I think, again from the Prime Minister, say in the coming days. Duke of Edinburgh has led. We expect to hear more in the coming hours and days over what this means for the nation practically in terms of how the nation will mourn his death.
And Daniel, you say we're expecting to hear more statements from other political leaders. Have you heard from any so far apart from the Prime Minister?
You have to forgive me, Lucrezia. We've been pretty busy here in the last 15 minutes in Downing Street, so I haven't been able to see what other political figures have said. We can expect, and we haven't already, to hear from the leader of the opposition, Sir Keir Starmer, and other political leaders. They will, of course, all be issuing statements and giving their thoughts and their condolences to Her Majesty the Queen and to the royal family. I'm sure that will be happening right now as I speak. As I say, we haven't been able to follow that. This has been a pretty quick turnaround here in Downing Street. As I say, the flags were lowered to half-mast just before 12:10, and within 10 minutes the Prime Minister was out giving that statement in front of the Downing Street lectern. As I say, we expect to hear from political figures and, let's face it, world leaders over the coming hours.
All right, Daniel Hewitt at Downing Street for the moment. Thank you. We're joined now by royal biographer Hugo Vickers. Hugo, you've known the Duke for a long time. This is a very sad day, isn't it?
It's a very, very sad day. But of course, he did have an extremely full life. And of course, knowing how he was, he would never want to have any particular fuss. I'm just so relieved that he was able to be back at Windsor Castle, because I know he wanted to get back to Windsor Castle. He and the Queen have loved the castle. They moved in there in 1952. They've been very, very happy there. And of course, many, many years ago in 1885, his mother was actually born in the castle. So there's a sense of history coming round.
And Hugo, the theme that the Duke would not have liked any fuss seems to be running through this, doesn't it? But how do you think he will be remembered?
Well, I think that the interesting thing will be when people actually explore all the things that he did. He kept a very extensive archive at Buckingham Palace. It was very well looked after by a very, very loyal archivist for many, many years. And I think people will be very surprised when they discover in the fullness of time the full he was involved with so many different things, and I think people will be very surprised. I think that he will go down in history as one of the most fascinating people that's lived in the 20th century.
And Hugo, we must of course remember that at the very heart of this will be the Queen, and a tremendous loss for her.
A tremendous loss for her, and I just think, as I said before, it's just such a relief that he was back in the castle. All the understanding was that he was actually doing quite well. So I hope that these last days have been tranquil and calm for both of them, because that's terribly important. It's very, very, very sad for the Queen. I quite agree.
And Hugo, from very unlikely beginnings, Prince Philip became our country's longest consul. That was something that was mentioned by the Prime Minister just a few moments ago. Tell us a bit more about what those early years looked like.
Yes, well, Prince Philip was born as a Prince of Greece and Denmark. His father was away serving in the Asia Minor campaign. He was born in Corfu in 1921. Very soon afterwards, the family went into exile. So he was brought up in exile in Paris, and he went to school there for a bit, and then he came over to England. He went to school at Cheen. He then very much loved Gordon. He thrived there very much. And then there was a question as to what he would do. And Lord Mountbatten and George VI and George II, the King of Greece, decided he should go into the British Navy. And there he served very, very well and very admirably all the way through the Second World War, very often in the Far Eastern waters. And then afterwards, of course, I had by that stage met Princess Elizabeth, and this relationship developed as it must have been quite complicated for them during wartime. And then after the war, as you know, in 1947, they got married, at which point his life changed very much. He never really had a home before then, and suddenly he did. And from that moment onwards, his first priority always was to be a support to the Queen. He did a lot of other things, yes, certainly, off his own bat, but his absolute priority was to help the Queen in any way he possibly could. And that, I think, was a remarkable success.
And Hugo, the Duke not only a support to the Queen, he was also instrumental, wasn't he, in bringing the royal family into the modern day?
Yes, I mean, when he first married, and well, indeed, when the Queen came to the throne in 1952, some of the courtiers actually weren't very nice to him. And the advantage of a constitutional hereditary monarchy is that it can change and develop over the years. I mean, the monarchy, the way the royal family operate now in 2021 is very, very different from the way it was in 1952. And yes, he certainly had a very, very strong influence in that. But of course, he also was always aware that the Queen was the Queen, and so he was a supportive figure. He didn't have a role in the Constitution as such. But there he was, and she was able to draw on his advice and support at any time that she needed it.
All right, Hugo Vickers, for the moment, thank you. We're going to go back now to our royal editor, Chris Shipp, who joins us once again on the line. Chris, first of all, tell us about the announcement on the gates of Buckingham Palace.
Yeah, that announcement is a tradition, really, and one that Buckingham Palace say that they wanted to honour today. You can see here in the forecourt of Buckingham Palace that notice goes up, the announcement, the official announcement of the death of the Queen's husband. However, we have been told where normally it would stay there for some considerable time, it will be taken down shortly because they don't want to attract any crowds to see see it. So that will not be up for very much longer. But that statement there is the same as the official one, Lucrezia, which we read to you at the very top, announcing the passing of the Duke of Edinburgh this morning at Windsor Castle, where he died peacefully.
Chris, we heard from the Prime Minister a few moments ago, didn't we? He talked about the huge role and impact that the Duke of Edinburgh had generally in the country, on the family. But what will be the impact on the family as a whole?
Well, you've got here someone who was a sort of central part of the family. Let's not forget that when the Queen became the monarch in 1952, she had to take on a lot of the responsibilities, and therefore a lot of the family responsibilities fell to him. So therefore he's always been a very sort of central part. I mean, if you look at him in more recent years at Sandringham, for example, where he always enjoyed those really big family occasions on Christmas Day when they went to church, he has always played a vital role in that. And actually one of the hospital traditional family gathering that they've had at Sandringham now for so many years. So he will be hugely missed. And I remember just a few weeks ago when Prince Charles, his eldest son, went in to see him in hospital, looking very sad when he left. That was when he was in King Edward VII for treatment for an infection. And I think, you could just see on his face that the family were coming to terms with his frailty as he approached his 100th birthday.
And Chris, you mentioned there, of course, approaching his 100th birthday. The Duke of Edinburgh had an extraordinary life, didn't he? And a very unusual upbringing.
Yes, you were just talking about some of that with Hugo Vickers just now. And I think, for anyone who's never really looked into the early years of Prince Philip's life, they were quite extraordinary. Born in 1921 on the island of Corfu, because his father, Prince Andrea, was a member of the Greek royal family at the time. And he was sent to a court-martial because of a military campaign that went disastrously wrong. And that was the reason why Prince Philip and his family, his mother, Princess Alice of Battenberg, had to suddenly pick everything up and flee. And it started what was to become a very nomadic lifestyle. His father, for example, settled in Monaco. His mother became mentally unstable and was treated in Germany. He was looked after a lot by his sisters. Though he had 4 elder sisters: Margarita, Theodora, Cecile, and Sophie. And that was really how he spent a lot of his formative years, in the care of his wider family, not in the care of his immediate mother and father. Now, he had a closer relationship with his mother in later years, and you can see pictures here of him when he joined the Royal Navy. And I think it was the Royal Navy that gave him a real rock, a real element of stability in his life that was lacking from his earlier years.
And Chris, we're looking at those earlier pictures of the Duke. Now, some of our viewers will remember, some won't. He really was quite the eligible bachelor in those post-war years, wasn't he?
He was, and I mentioned a few moments ago about the wedding to the Queen. His father's family, it comes from Denmark. His mother's from Germany, but also his mother's family was also related to Queen Victoria. So when he arrived on the scene after the war, he cut a very dashing figure. And, we had a young queen at the time as well, just 25 years of age. And here was a man who was prepared to put everything that he wanted to do, his own career in the Royal Navy, put everything to one side in order to support his wife, which he has done every single day between that date in February 1952 when King George VI passed away, right until today on his own passing. He's always been by the Queen, and a man who's always wanted to remain active. He's always had links with the Navy, but essentially, and I think as Hugo Vickers was just telling you, a man who really just stood by the Queen throughout all of those years.
Yeah, and Chris, let's talk more about that Prince Philip's relationship with the Queen. He really, really was her strength and her stay for so much of their lives together, wasn't he?
You know, that strength and stay quote has become one that's been well used. In fact, even the Prime Minister used it a few moments ago on the streets outside Downing Street. And it was made by the Queen in 1997 on the date of their golden wedding anniversary. And she had that room in laughter when she said that all too often I fear Prince Philip has had to listen to me speaking. But, you know, it's worth listening to the full quotes there when the Queen speaks about her just thanks, her gratitude to Prince Philip, what he has done. I and his whole family, and this and many other countries, said the Queen on that day, owe him a debt greater than he would ever claim or we shall ever know.
All right, our royal editor, Chris Shipp, for now. Thank you. With Prince Philip no longer at the Queen's side, the second Elizabethan era will end as Victorian times did with a widow Queen. The sight of the Queen without the Duke has become more familiar since his retirement from public life in 2017. But in private, their relationship remained as close as ever. As Rachel Younger reports, the Queen must now go on without
it all. Through the good times and the bad, the Queen and Prince Philip remained side by side, right to the end.
All the Commonwealth realm.
Now she grieves for a husband whose guidance meant so much.
During these years as your Queen, the support of my family has, across the generations, been beyond measure. Prince Philip is, I believe, well known for declining compliments of any kind. But throughout, he has been a constant strength and guide.
Even as a teenager setting out in life, Philip was already there. It was at a society wedding when the handsome prince from Greece was first seen to offer the young princess and her sister his gentle support. Their engagement was initially kept secret until Elizabeth turned 21, but news of their marriage captured the public's imagination and the nation's heart.
Oh, this was a day of national rejoicing, a day indeed which had caught the imagination of men and women all over the world.
And their wedding put the couple truly centre stage in a national pageant. The pair had expected to spend their early years of marriage in Malta. Philip was stationed there with the Navy, and his career was progressing fast.
It was on the next day that the Princess and the Duke attended the Saddle Club dance at the Hotel Phoenicia.
But those carefree days would end much sooner than expected. With King George VI dying aged just 56, the Duke gave it all up to concentrate on royal duties.
It's naturally disappointing because I'd just been promoted to commander. And in fact, the most interesting part of a naval career was just starting. But then equally, if I stopped and thought about it, well, being married to the Queen, it seems to me that my first duty was to serve her in the best way I could.
It was the start of a partnership which caught the attention of millions around the world. 3/4 of the population of Australia turned out to see. The sea of faces followed the couple wherever they went. Over the decades, they became a formidable partnership. And although the Queen was the centre of attention, they took on the world as a team.
He was always supporting her. But they make a unique team together. We're very lucky to have two such strong people and who were never rivals.
Philip's sense of fun and ability to put the Queen at ease helped to relieve the pressure on many formal occasions.
Mr. Chairman, I'm afraid the Queen forgot to bring her glasses with her. So I've been asked to read her speech. He's left his hand out there.
And his willingness to embrace change and technology helped them take the monarchy forward together. But at the age of 96, the Duke was ready for a break. He stepped away from public life with the Queen's blessing after more than 22,000 engagements. At the time, it was expected that the rest of the family would step in to accompany the Queen. Instead, Prince Andrew's been forced out, and Harry and Meghan have acrimoniously withdrawn from real life. Sheltering from the pandemic at Windsor Castle, the Queen's had a lot to weather. But she's continued to press on with her public duties.
To do that by yourself, I think, would be a very, very lonely place to be. But I think to have the support of your husband there by your side on those occasions and behind closed doors as well, I think is really special.
After a life with him, Queen Elizabeth must now face her future without him, Britain's widow queen. And in this new solo journey, she'll be looking for the support of her family to continue life without the companionship of the consort who was with her for so long.
Good afternoon. If you have just joined us, we have broken into our regular programming to bring you a special programme following the death of the Duke of Edinburgh. And so let me just repeat the statement which we have received in the past hour from Buckingham Palace. It reads, "It is with deep sorrow that Her Majesty the Queen announces the death of her beloved husband, His Royal Highness the Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. His Royal Highness passed away peacefully this morning at Windsor Castle. Further announcements will be made in due course." The royal family join with people around the world in mourning his loss. So that statement released about an hour ago by Buckingham Palace on the death of His Royal Highness for the family, the country and indeed around the world.
This is a very sad day. I mean, it's been inevitable. It was coming, but it's so sad that he didn't make his 100th birthday, just a couple of months away. But you know, he'd had a very good innings. This is a death of a man who really had lived life to the full, who'd given a lot of pleasure to an awful lot of people, and a huge support to the Queen over the years. And you know, all things sadly must come to an end.
I think it is always astonishing, and I remember on the very sad day that Her Royal Highness, that the Queen Mother, Her Majesty the Queen Mother, died. Even though she was very elderly, and even though the Duke of Edinburgh was 99, it is still something of a shock, isn't it, when somebody who we have known for so long passes away?
I think it's always a shock. I mean, yes, you're right. You know, we should expect it, but for some reason we don't. These people, you know, members of the royal family, the Duke of Edinburgh in particular, for most people alive at the moment, he's been there for our whole life long. And you know, it just seems incredible that they should go.
Yes, it does indeed, Penny. We're looking right now at pictures of the flag at half-mast over Buckingham Palace. And there you have the reality of it, that the Duke of Edinburgh has indeed passed away at the age of 99. He always said, didn't he, he couldn't think of anything worse than living to 100. So in that sense, I suppose he has done, as ever, exactly what he said he would do.
Yes, I think we must, you know, we must be pleased for him. It sounds, you know, we don't know the details yet, but we're told he passed away peacefully. And that, you know, and being at home with his family, with his wife, that's a pretty good death, I think.
He had been in hospital for a month, hadn't he, in the Edward VII Hospital. He had been quite unwell. We didn't know the details, some sort of heart procedure and something for an existing condition as well. But we understood then, in mid-March, that he was very keen to return to Windsor Castle. Perhaps that is where he wanted
their own things in their own bed with their own family around them. And I think, you know, a month in hospital was a very long time for him, for anyone. And inevitably, although the heart was operated upon, and he was deemed fit to go home. A month is a long time to be lying in a bed for anyone of that sort of age, for anyone really, but particularly for that sort of age. And I think that he will have been weakened by that. But to have had 3 weeks after the hospital stay at home, I have to say it's as good as it could be.
Yes, I suppose that's as much as any of us can hope for. And he was not a man who ever took kindly to being out of condition, did he? He was so active. He was such an action man. And I remember my mother years ago saying he was a real pin-up for women of that generation. He was a Greek god in many senses.
Yes, he was a Greek god. I mean, he was a very good-looking man, as a young man and as an old man. He was always so lean and fit and just so sparky. He was an extraordinary character. And yes, he had his sort of rougher sides, and he was quite intolerant of a lot of things, including journalists. But he did so much. He was interested in so many different things. He was just, he was constantly on the go. And I think for that reason, as much as any, to have been lying in a hospital bed and then to be unable really to get on with life and to be active, I think must have been very difficult for him. Yes. So I'm sure that this has to be a sort of a blessed release for him. Not so much for the Queen, of course, and his children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, but I think for him.
Yeah, you have said in the past, Penny, that the Duke was the perfect complement to the Queen. He was the longest-serving consort to a partnership. Do you think that worked so well, both personally and indeed professionally?
Well, I think that they were dissimilar. And I think that was one of the strengths. They had different interests. But they came together. They had this, I think they shared a great sense of humour. He definitely made her laugh, and I think she made him laugh. But they also had their ups and downs, and there were sort of stories famously of her being so cross with him that she shut herself in a cabin on the Britannia, on the Royal Yacht, and said, "I'm not coming out until Philip's in a better temper." And equally, I think he threatened to throw her out of the car once because she was annoying him or criticising him. So, I mean, it was a lively relationship, and but in public and in her public life, he was absolutely key to it. I think she is a shy woman, and he was not. So he would break the ice in awkward situations, or when the Queen was perhaps nervous or not quite knowing what to say. He would leap in, and if ever the Queen missed something, didn't notice there was a child perhaps wanting to. I mean, I remember I was in the market town of Dorking one year, and the Queen and Duke of Edinburgh had come together, and there was a little girl in the crowd who had a single daffodil in her hand, and the Queen came down along the barrier, spoke to the mother, spoke to other people on either side, and didn't notice the little girl who was quite low down, and she then went on without taking the flower. Prince Philip noticed what had happened, and he went over to the little girl, and he lifted her up and hoiked her over the barrier and said, "Go and give your flower to the Queen." So it was that sort of thing. He mopped up, if ever she, not that she'd made any messes, but he was very useful.
Who keeps in touch with what the royal family are doing on the balcony at Buckingham Palace. The Queen, of course, centre of the balcony as the monarch, but Prince Philip beside her, and the whole family arrayed around them. And he was the head of this very large family.
He absolutely was. You know, in public, he walked 2 steps behind the Queen. But in private, he ruled the roost. He was the one who took care of the family matters, who took care of the estates. You know, he decided which schools the children went to, decided how their further education would develop and what their careers would be. He was very much in charge. So he wasn't emasculated. Although in public, it must have been quite hard for a man like him, who was very much an alpha male, to be walking 2 paces behind the Queen.
And of that generation, of course, when it was less usual for women to be in positions of authority or leadership, of course.
Completely. Yes. No, and you know, he was on a career path. He was in the Navy. He had his own command of his own ship. And he would have gone, I think, probably very far. And he'd been, you know, named during the war. He'd won sort of medals and things. He could have had that career, and that was what he loved doing. And it all came to a terrible end very quickly, very early in his career, because of the death of the king. George VI died, and his wife then suddenly became queen, and he couldn't carry on with his career. So he gave up everything, and they even gave up their house. You know, I mean, when he was on shore, they were living in Clarence House, which was really the first home that Philip had had. He'd had a very peripatetic sort of childhood, and he had settled, he'd married, he'd got his 2 children, and they were living in Clarence House, which, you know, was a home. And it is the most homely of those royal houses. And suddenly he had to give that up, and he had to give up his career, and he had to go and live in Buckingham Palace, which is not a cosy place at all. It's
for a pretty spectacular existence in lots of ways. But it can't have been easy, despite all the wealth and the status and so on. It must have been quite a challenge in all sorts of ways.
Oh, I think anybody that thinks this royal life is easy really doesn't understand anything. I mean, these people are in a goldfish bowl. There is no privacy for them, very little privacy. They are criticised and watched and listened to. I mean, every move they make is scrutinised and analysed. And there's no freedom. You know, the Duke of Edinburgh, his workload was extraordinary, right up until he retired, you know, which was in his 90s. He, day after day after day, he was out, he was meeting people, he was raising money, he was raising awareness, he was traveling the world with the Queen on his own. His days were not his own. So yes, of course there were privileges, and, you know, lovely to have a helicopter to drive around in, be flown around in, and a royal train, and the yacht when they had it. But I don't think many people really would swap their lives for the lives of these families.
Penny, it's so interesting talking to you. Thank you very much indeed for your time this morning on what is undoubtedly a very sad day for the royal family and indeed the country. Penny Gina, thank you. Well, leaders of all political parties have been paying tribute to the Duke of Edinburgh. This is what the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, had to say in Downing Street just a short time ago.
It was with great sadness that a short time ago I received word from Buckingham Palace that His Royal Highness, the Duke of Edinburgh, has passed away at the age of 99. Prince Philip earned the affection of generations here in the United Kingdom, across the Commonwealth, and around the world. He was the longest serving consort in history, one of the last surviving people in this country to have served in the Second World War, at Cape Matapan, where he was mentioned in And from that conflict, he took an ethic of service that he applied throughout the unprecedented changes of the post-war era. Like the expert carriage driver that he was, he helped to steer the royal family and the monarchy so that it remains an institution indisputably vital to the balance and happiness of our national life. He was an environmentalist and a champion of the natural world long before it was fashionable. With his Duke of Edinburgh award scheme, he shaped and inspired the lives of countless young people, and at literally tens of thousands of events, he fostered their hopes and encouraged their ambitions. We remember the Duke for all of this, and above all, for his steadfast support for Her Majesty the Queen. Not just as her consort, by her side every day of her reign, but as her husband, her strength and stay of more than 70 years. And it is to Her Majesty and her family that our nation's thoughts must turn today, because they have lost not just a much-loved and highly respected public figure, but a devoted husband and a proud and loving father, grandfather, and in recent years, great-grandfather. Speaking on their golden wedding anniversary, Her Majesty said that our country owed her husband a greater debt than he would ever claim or we shall ever know. And I'm sure that estimate is correct. So we mourn today with Her Majesty the Queen. We offer our condolences to her and to all her family. And we give thanks as a nation and a kingdom for the extraordinary life and work of Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh.
The Prime Minister Boris Johnson speaking just a few minutes ago on the death of His Royal Highness the Duke of Edinburgh, and the leader of the Labour Party, Sir Keir Starmer, has described the impact of the Duke had on public life.
Well, the UK has lost an extraordinary public servant in Prince Philip. He dedicated his life to our country, and above all, I think he'll be remembered for his support to mourn this huge loss.
Leader of Her Majesty's Opposition, Sir Keir Starmer there. And our political correspondent, Daniel Hewitt, is in Downing Street now. Daniel, there is inevitably a lot of political reaction, as I guess we might expect.
That's right, Mary. We've heard now from all three First Ministers of the devolved nations of the UK, from Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. Nicola Sturgeon tweeting, "I am saddened by news that the Duke of Edinburgh has died. I send my personal and deepest condolences and those of the Scottish Government and the people of Scotland to Her Majesty the Queen and her family." The First Minister of Wales, Mark Drakeford, said, "Incredibly sad to hear of the passing of the Duke of Edinburgh. He served the Crown with selfless devotion and will be sorely missed by the people of Wales and the many organisations he supported. My condolences to Her Majesty the Queen and the family during this sad time." Similar messages from the First Minister of Northern Ireland, Arlene Foster, and the Deputy First Minister of Northern Ireland, Michelle O'Neill. Now, I can tell you that the all Holyrood parties in Scotland have suspended political campaigning ahead of the Scottish Parliament elections in May. We can expect to hear, I think, the same shortly from all political parties for the local elections as well in England. So campaigning suspended in Scotland. Expect to hear the same in England as well. Those tributes coming in, those statements, many of them right now are actually on Twitter, but we can expect to hear, like we have from the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition, Sir Keir Starmer, those statements be made on camera in the next hour.
Well, Dan, the death of the Duke has no constitutional significance, does it? It doesn't change anything in terms of the structure at the top of the country, but it is nonetheless very significant, isn't it?
That's absolutely right, Mary, and we can expect to hear in some form from Downing Street, I think in the next few hours, exactly what this will mean for the country in the coming days. Now, national mourning officially begins immediately, lasts until 8 o'clock in the morning on the day of the funeral. The royal family officially mourn for 1 month, but we can expect to see, I think, changes to national real life over the next few days in terms of cancelled events. Traditionally, sporting events are often cancelled in these somber statement. The seriousness of what has happened here, the flags in Downing Street, the two Union flags were lowered within minutes of that announcement being made by the royal family. I think over the next few hours we'll be hearing more from Downing Street in terms of the practicalities of what this will mean for the United Kingdom over the coming days and weeks.
Okay, Dan, for the moment, thank you very much indeed. No doubt we'll be returning to you in due course. But right now we're going to go to Windsor, and you can see live pictures where flowers and a small crowd are starting to gather. Similar scenes will, of course, be expected at Buckingham Palace, where our correspondent Juliet Bremner is for us right now. So, Juliet, as with previous royal deaths, we've seen large crowds gathering where you are, but with the pandemic, these are not normal times, are they?
That's absolutely right. And because of the fact that we're not in normal times, then the normal custom and tradition has been changed. We do have the official death announcement, which is literally on an A4 size piece of paper behind glass. And that was posted on the railings outside Buckingham Palace shortly after death, so sometime after 12 o'clock today. It just repeats the announcement that you will already have heard from the royal family, but it's there as a public signifier of what has happened. Now, normally that would stay there for 24 hours, but because we're in a pandemic, the decision has been made to take it down in just under an hour, because they don't want lots of crowds coming here, which would normally be the case. They want to make sure that they do as little as possible to attract that kind of attention. But despite that, we have got some people, as you can probably see, who have come. They said that they had heard the sad news. They wanted to come and pay their respects, although, of course, the Duke of Edinburgh wasn't in residence here when he died. They still wanted to come, and we saw some little children in front of the palace, and they were putting down bouquets as an emblem of their sadness and their loss. Of course, none of them would really have known Prince Philip in his prime, but their parents do. I mean, he's been a constant in all our lives, really, for virtually everybody alive in the country at the moment. So as we speak, we do have the normal events going on outside Buckingham Palace, but they will be curtailed. And they will want to make their way here to pay their own personal respects.
Now, Juliet, because of the pandemic, things, as you say, are not happening as they had been planned, and people who are watching may not be aware of how closely these big royal events are planned and for how many years in advance. Everything will have been very carefully laid out, won't it? Everybody will have known exactly what they're doing. But because of COVID-19 and the restrictions on crowds and so on, everything is going to be different, isn't it? Everything from the funeral and onwards from that.
You're absolutely right, Mary. I think we should say first and foremost that this isn't a surprise, as sad as it may be for everybody. We've all known that Prince Philip was not well over the last few months. We saw him very publicly being taken to hospital, and then only a short time ago, a few weeks ago, being driven home in an ambulance back to Windsor, where he and the Queen are currently in residence. So we've known that this was a possibility, and it has been carefully planned. I think we can say with safety, carefully planned with his consultation. He will have specified what he wanted to happen in the event of his death, and we know for certain that he was a man who wanted no fuss, no ceremony. He didn't want a big hullabaloo about the fact that he died. He is a man who was 99, who's lived an incredible life, one of great vigour, really, until the last few years. And he made it clear that he didn't want to see a bigger than necessary fuss. I mean, he's a member of the royal family, so of course you expect it to be noted and to be noted around the world. He has died just before his 100th birthday, which is very poignant. But he will have been talking to people about what he wanted to happen, and he won't be be lying in state. He didn't want that. But we understand that the plans that were agreed was that he will be lie in state at Windsor in the chapel there. I don't suppose, though, because we are in these very unusual times, that we're going to see big queues of people allowed to assemble there, because that would not be appropriate when we have the pandemic. However, I'm sure there will be occasion for people to pay their respects and to pay their
by any standards. Juliet, for the moment, thank you very much indeed. And joining me now is Simon Lewis, who is Buckingham Palace's Director of Communications. And that was from 1998 to 2000. Simon, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. You have worked in very close proximity with the Duke of Edinburgh over a couple of years. How different behind closed doors was Prince Philip to the man who we all feel that we're familiar with in the public eye?
Well, first of all, it's a terribly sad day for the Queen. It's a terribly sad day for the royal family. It's a sad day for the country. And I have to say, it's a very sad day for those of us who were lucky enough to work with him or for him. He was an extraordinary person, because I think the tributes I've heard so far have all been absolutely spot on, particularly what the Prime Minister said about the ethic of service. But the thing that struck me most about him was he was a moderniser. He actually wanted to change things, but change things that worked with the institution of the monarchy. And when we look back over the last 20, 30 years, really Prince Philip was the person behind the scenes who was pushing, alongside the Queen, of course, for the kind of incremental changes that was so necessary to move the monarchy on, and not seeking to take credit for it, not seeking to get anything more than the right thing for his wife, the Queen, and the royal family and the institution of the monarchy. And if you combine that with this enormously restless intellect that he had, it was a very powerful combination. And when I was at the palace 20 years ago, he was already in his late 70s, but he had the vibrancy and vitality of a man half his age even then.
He really was a very forward-thinking man, wasn't he? And as you say, he modernised the royal family after the Queen came to power, and he really made it, in a sense, what it is today. And it wasn't an easy process, was it? There was some pushback from some of the palace old hands in those early days.
Yes, I think he was considered to be an outsider, and it took some time for him to get to a position where, having given up this enormously successful, potentially even more successful career, to find a role for himself. And I think he chose the topics he wanted to change extremely well. I think they were his passions as well, and I think he was a man of integrity who cared about certain things. But when it came to the running of the institution, he was very practical. I'll give you one example from my time. In 1998, I think there were 100 million users of the internet, and it was the Prince Philip who had the foresight to realise that actually the royal family could utilise that, and he pushed very hard the way the monarchy, the royal family, has communicated subsequently. So he was prepared to push, he was prepared to take risks when necessary, but always with the best interests of his wife, the Queen, and the institution at heart. And I also think he was prepared to take strong stances when he felt that was appropriate. And that might be part of the reason that some of the press comment over the years has been sort of less than complimentary, but it was because he cared about these issues. And I think that should never be forgotten.
He was instrumental, as I think you're saying, in making the royal family much more accessible, wasn't he, to the public? And in fact, am I right in saying it was his idea to agree to that very early documentary, giving a glimpse behind into the gilded cage, if you like?
Yes, I think also Lord Attenborough had something, was involved as well. Of course, they were very close. And that was another big decision, to actually open up, the water badgered idea of there being a mystery behind the royal family, opening up a bit. I actually think it was the right thing to do. I think the British people really, really enjoyed that and connected with the institution. But he was also aware, and I talked to him about this over the years, that by doing that, the kind of genie slightly came out of the bottle, that actually going forward there would be even greater press scrutiny of the royal family. And I think he saw that relationship as a kind of a trade-off between being visible and accessible, so people understanding the role of the royal family, the monarchy, but accepting that coming with that was a degree of scrutiny that anyone would find uncomfortable. So that was his sort of vision.
Yeah, I think the Queen herself described it as letting daylight in on the magic, and it is it was a balance, wasn't it? Because there was a hunger. People wanted to know more about them and the family, and they were a very glamorous pair back then, weren't they?
Very glamorous. And the other thing is, the family, or the royal family, in a way holds up a mirror to all of us. And I think part of the enduring sort of attraction of the royal family is that we see in a family, our own family, in very different ways, obviously. But I think that kind of connection with the royal family as a family, fathers, sons, daughters, and then later granddaughters and great-grandchildren, it's a big thing. And it's part of the magic. But Prince Philip was always very practical. When we came to talking about televising events, royal events like the investitures, which we did in that period, he was very practical, and he wanted to know how it was going to work, what the benefits were going to be, whether it was something that was going to be positive for the monarchy, and yes, we pushed forward on that. So that kind of practicality around it, I think without him it would have been probably more challenging for some of those changes to be developed.
I don't know whether you would agree they were gaffes or whether they were a demonstration of his bluff, rather straightforward personality. But that must have been quite difficult, quite challenging, in a sense, to manage as a communications chief back then.
Well, he spoke his mind, and I don't think he ever wanted to finesse his views according to the audience he was with. And I think it's well known that he didn't find many of the press, the sort of so-called royal rat packs, he didn't find them particularly agreeable. But the fact that I was appointed as a communications secretary from outside, the fact that, in fact, my final interview was with the Queen and Prince Philip, I think said a lot, that he understood that they constantly needed to think about more effective ways of communicating. And the reality is that there was a period, let's be honest, when the tabloid press in particular were running riot. And I think that was a very difficult period for Prince Philip and the royal family, that kind of whole period in the year or two after the death of Princess of Wales. And I think he was standing up, actually, for the family in some of his views about the press. And it's obviously improved and changed a lot since then. But I remember once going on a visit with him to Arsenal Football Club, to the stadium there, and he completely benignly asked the young guy what was the name on the shirt. It was JVC, the sponsor at that time, and that was considered to be a gaffe. And so one or two newspapers wrote stories saying Prince Philip doesn't know what JVC is. Well, actually, I was standing alongside him, and he was making small talk. So I think there was an element of it became a bit of a game in a way, and the Duke of Edinburgh was not prepared to play that game.
You were talking about a challenging time for the royal family in the late 90s after the death of Her Royal Highness, the Princess of Wales. Of course, the family finds itself in another, I guess it could be described as a challenging period now with the departure of William and of Harry and Meghan, I should say. And they will have to now navigate this without the patriarch at their head. Will his presence be missed in that respect, do you think?
Of course his presence will be missed, and we've heard earlier, he was the patriarch of the family, and every family either has a matriarch or patriarch or both. And, just at a family level, I'm sure there was sadness about what's happened over the last period. But I do think, as I said, he was enormously practical. I mean, even the fact that he just said an awful lot about, again, his desire not to be seen to be or interfering in the future of the family, given that he, I think, had done his bit, and he certainly had done his bit.
Simon Lewis, thank you so much for talking to us today. It's so interesting. Thank you. And our royal editor, Chris Shipp, is here. You have rushed in. Of course, this is something that you have been preparing for some time. It's very important to get these occasions correct, isn't it? And it's a very significant occasion for the royal family and indeed for the country.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we should, at any point underestimate the significance of this moment just because of his age. Yes, he was 99, he would have been 100 in June, but, we just got to think about the length of time he has been giving that service to the Queen, not since just since she became Queen in 1952, but since the marriage in 1947 as well, and all that time in between. I mean, you have to be of a significant age yourself right now to remember a time before the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh. And of course, I think this is an extremely sad moment for the Queen. And I remember, you know, a few years ago when he went into hospital and she had to carry out some of the events on her own, and that became a moment of the Queen doing things, you know, without the Duke by her side. Now, since then, he's clearly retired, he's taken a step back, and we've seen a lot more of that. But it was that sort of change at the very top that you know, we've been used to it from the 50s, the 60s, the 70s. And now, you know, here we are looking at pictures of Downing Street as the country mourns. Downing Street leading the nation here as we mourn a man who had an extraordinary life, a very full life, and a very long life as well. But one with his departure, of course, then I just think for the Queen, it's a very sad and a significant moment, and someone that she was missed, and someone, as we were saying when the news broke, that she spent a lot of time with in Windsor over the past year because of the pandemic.
Yeah. At the heart of this, it is a big event because of the royal family being who they are, but at the heart of it is a real family, and a very elderly lady who has now been widowed after a very long marriage, and it is a very, very sad story, isn't it, by any standards?
Yes, and I think that's just how we should see this. This is not a tragic event. The Duke was 90. We keep referring to this phrase "strength and stay," which is what the Queen used in 1997 when she was referring to him. And just look at pictures like that, where he's always been at her side, whatever the event, be it a sombre event like a remembrance service, or be it a celebration, he's always been there. And I think that she's grown to rely on him so much over these years, and particularly in this past year, they've been in what's been termed very loosely as HMS Bubble in Windsor, where they've got a small coterie of staff that's been looking after a very elderly monarch and the very elderly consort, so as not to risk any transmission of the virus. And they moved to Windsor in March of last year, and as I've just been saying, they spent a long time together. It's where they've had their 73rd wedding anniversary. It's where he celebrated his 99th birthday. It's where we thought that he would celebrate his 100th birthday. But you know, to take a look at the picture there in the House of Lords as the Queen sits there with her husband by her side. I mean, look at those pictures, and this is what we're now no longer going to see.
Yeah, it really is. It really is sad to imagine that, and the Queen will now be a widowed Queen in the same way as Queen Victoria was. How significant will that be in terms of her role? Can we expect to see anything different from her?
Well, we've had that transition underway for a while now, ever since in 2017 when he announced his retirement, and he spent a lot of time, let's not forget, in Sandringham, away from the Queen. He's been living in a very small complex of cottages called Wood Farm at Sandringham, and I think the Queen's got used to doing the day job without him there, but it's at those times when she needs that support of her husband, be it when she's at Windsor, be it when they spend the summer in Balmoral, as they do every year. That is something that she's going to find very difficult to come to terms with, as anyone who's been widowed or lost a husband or wife will understand. And I don't think there'll be any significant change to her duty in that sense. She will carry on doing the things that she's, you know, was scheduled to do this year, but she'll be doing it alone, and she'll be doing it without that support.
And the statement Buckingham Palace, I think, was notable, wasn't it? Because the Queen doesn't normally exhibit a lot of emotion, shall we say, but she says her beloved husband and the deepest sorrow.
Yeah.
And in a sense, that tells you everything that you need to know, doesn't it?
You're right, and actually on the royal family's main home 2021 to 2021, and that statement that you read a short while ago, it's with deep sorrow that Her Majesty the Queen announces the death of her beloved husband, and actually in some ways a much more personal statement than what we might have expected from the Queen. And you know, a life,
some great archive.
Exactly.
Because this is in a sense
it's a joy
what
to
it's
look
all
at,
about,
isn't it?
It's a real treat to look at this. And that's them on their honeymoon at Broadlands, isn't it? A couple of days after.
Yep, that's at Broadlands, just after their wedding. So this is in the winter of 1947. And you were saying earlier, I remember in one of your conversations, about how your mother remembers a very dashing man that came in, a man who was...
We were all in love with him, said my mum.
A man not only born in Greece, but with a lot of Danish blood in him. That's where that fair hair comes from. And someone who swept this young princess off her feet, who, as we all now know, became queen at a much younger age than everyone had thought.
One of the biographies I read, Chris, said that he, in a sense, showed her the world. He unlocked the gilded cage that she had been brought up in and made her more normal, in a sense. What do you think about that?
You could say that about a lot of couples, couldn't you? About that they introduce an element of their lives into their husband or wife's life, which helps to change them. And yes, the Queen led a very sheltered life, if you look at it that way. She just spent the last previous 5 years at Windsor during the war years, where she and her sister Margaret Rose spent all that time. Some pictures here of him doing his famous carriage driving in later years as well. One interesting fact I always remember is he changed to carriage driving in about 1973 when he retired from playing polo. Now, if that gives you any idea of actually quite, what a remarkable and long life he led. At age 50 in 1973, he stopped the polo and took up carriage driving. But the Prime Minister mentioned a short while ago about the significance of his environmental campaigning. We all know Prince Charles for being a very keen environmentalist, but it was something that was handed from the Duke of Edinburgh to Prince Charles, and you might also argue from Prince Charles to Prince William, that care for the environment and for nature conservation. And he was the first president of the Worldwide Fund for Nature, as it was called then, and spent a lot of time nurturing that particular hobby. And I was mentioning polo, wasn't I, a short while ago, and this is what he retired from in order to take up the not undangerous sport of carriage driving. There is that famous picture of him.
Those pictures are very evocative, aren't they? Those pictures are very evocative, aren't they, of a past era. Well, Chris, we're going to be talking so much more over the next few hours, next few days, no doubt. For the moment, thank you very much indeed. And it has just gone 1:30 p.m. If you have just joined us, we have broken into our regular programming for special coverage following the death of His Royal Highness Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh. At midday, Buckingham Palace announced that Prince Philip had died at the age of 99. He and the Queen had been married for 73 years. He was the longest-serving consort in British history. A frame notice announcing his death was placed on the railings outside Buckingham Palace. The statement, which was issued by the palace, read, "It is with deep sorrow that Her Majesty the Queen announces the death of her beloved husband, His Royal Highness the Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. His Royal Highness passed away peacefully this morning at Windsor Castle, and further announcements will be made in due course. The royal family," it concludes, join with people around the world in mourning his loss. Flags at Buckingham Palace, Downing Street and the Palace of Westminster have been lowered to half-mast. And the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, has joined those across the country and indeed around the world in paying tribute to the Duke. Speaking in Downing Street, Boris Johnson said the nation's thoughts were with the Queen and the rest of the royal family.
Prince Philip earned the affection of generations here in the United Kingdom, across the Commonwealth, and around the world. He was the longest-serving consort in history, one of the last surviving people in this country to have served in the Second World War. At Cape Matapan, where he was mentioned in dispatches for bravery, and in the invasion of Sicily, where he saved his ship by his quick thinking. And from that conflict, he took an ethic of service that he applied throughout the unprecedented changes of the post-war era. Like the expert carriage driver that he was, he helped to steer the royal family and the monarchy of our national life.
The Prime Minister speaking just a few minutes ago, and the leader of the Labour Party, Sir Keir Starmer, has also been paying tribute, saying Prince Philip will be remembered for his support and his devotion to the Queen.
Well, the UK has lost an extraordinary public servant in Prince Philip. He dedicated his life to our country, and above all, I think he'll be remembered for his support and devotion to the Queen. And all of our thoughts are with the Queen, the royal family, and the British public as they come together to mourn this huge loss.
Sir Keir Starmer again speaking a few minutes ago, and the First Ministers of Northern Ireland, Wales and Scotland have also paid their own tributes, with Nicola Sturgeon saying she was saddened by the news and sent her personal and deepest condolences, and those of the people of Scotland, to the Queen and her family. Well, now we can speak to the royal historian Jane Ridley. Jane, thank you very much indeed for joining me this afternoon. Very sad day. Prince Philip was the longest serving